my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing a dragon. Today's dragon is going to be a very interesting dragon. One of you guys actually suggested it, and I'm going to be basically styling the dragon off of an axolotl. I think that's how you say the name. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, I apologize. I have no idea how to say it correctly. Even when I hear someone say it correctly, I completely blank out on it later. But I'm basically going to be making a dragon based off of the features of an axolotl and then just adding other features to it to make it look a little bit more interesting. Anyways, let's get started.
Okay, so for this piece, I wanted to pick out a few kind of fun decorative things to work with. So I have a few beads. I believe these are made out of shell. I have a few resined horns I made quite a while ago and just never used, and I want to use them today. Along with a few other plastic and resin pieces, I think I'm going to use these domes for the eyes, and then I also have this really cool lace that has some beads on it. So I think I'm going to go with a very pale color palette for this creature. So I'm going to start working on the clay head first for a dragon, and then we'll move on to making some feet. So I'm going to start off with my lump of tin foil, get that completely covered in clay, smoothed out. For the shape of it, I'm kind of roughly keeping it a little domed and round. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to take some balls of clay and mark out where I want the eyes to go. I want them to be slightly lifted and facing forward, so I'm going to use some balls of clay, and then I'm taking those resin domes, and I'm going to place those, and those are going to be our eyes. Once I have the position of the eyes figured out, I'm then going to take some strips of clay and lay them out underneath and over the eye. If you want to add any other details to the eyelids, you can. For example, the bottom of the eye, I'm going to add an extra wrinkle, so I'm going to take another strip and put that right underneath the original strip of clay. So I'm going to get my clay laid out and use my tools to kind of move it around, blend it together, and just kind of get a more clean look to it. Now the base of the head I want to be a little thicker than the rest of the head because I want to have a mane of lace kind of surrounding it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start building up clay at the base of the head just so it kind of sticks out more and I have more to work with. Plus this will give us more to decorate as well. So I'm going to lay that out and then blend it in and get it kind of roughly shaped. Once we have a basic layout and we've figured out how we kind of roughly want our face to look, we can start adding more details to it. So I'm going to start adding the beads and different gems that I've picked out for the piece. So I'm going to start out with those little round beads that are made out of shell, and I'm going to start pushing them into the base all the way around the trim of the head. I'm then going to start decorating around them. I figured it'd be really fun to add a strip of clay and kind of wiggle it around the edges of the beads. So I'm going to take that, and then I'm also going to kind of blend it in a little bit. I don't want it completely standing on its own. I want it to kind of look a little bit more like it's part of the face. So I messed around with that a little bit. I figured out what I wanted to do with it. While messing around with that, I decided that I needed to have the snout a little bit longer on the dragon. So I'm going to add some clay to the front of the face and blend that in. Now that I have the snout long enough to work with, I'm going to start adding my horns to the front of the face. I think I'm going to have the longest horn in the front, and then the other two are going to be behind that horn. So I'm going to take those horns, I'm going to place them into the position that I want them on the top of the head, make sure that I like that, push them in nice and hard. I'm going to kind of clean up the edges around them and make sure they're kind of secure, but I'll probably end up popping these off later and gluing them into place just to make sure they stay on. So I'm going to get those in place, and then I'm going to mess around with the mouth. For the mouth, I'm just going to take a little bit of clay for the bottom lip. I'm going to place that and blend everything together. Now while I was working on the mouth, I originally wanted it to be closed so it'd look a little bit more elegant, but as I was making the face, I decided to add a bit more of a goofy effect to it, so I decided to have the mouth opened with the tongue sticking out. So I used my tools to just kind of make a nice little hole for where the mouth would be opened, and then I took a kind of flattened piece of clay and I used that for the tongue. So I laid that in place and I used my tools to kind of blend it in and make sure it was nice and secure inside of the mouth. After that, I was pretty happy with the basic layout. I know I want to add more decorative bits to the face, but those are made out of plastic and I don't trust them to go through the oven, so those are going to be added later. So right now I'm just going to start adding texture to the face. I'm going to use my dotting tool to add a bit of a scaling effect, and then any other features that I want to add I'm going to start decorating the face with. And then once I'm happy with the texture of the face, everything looks really nice, I'm then going to take those horns and I'm going to pop them carefully off of the face. If anything messes up, I'm going to clean that up, and then we can put our head in the oven for probably about 45 minutes. The main reason I'm popping the horns off and not running them through the oven is sometimes resin does tend to yellow when you bake it, so I don't want these to yellow because I want them to stay as white as possible, so I'm just doing that to be careful. So we're going to let that bake, and while that's baking, we're going to work on the clay feet. So for our clay feet, I'm going to start off with a basic wireframe for all 4 of them. Now the way I want to do my feet, I think the front feet and the back feet are pretty much going to be identical, so I'm going to be doing the same thing for all 4 of them. The wireframes that I have for the feet are pretty simple. I just want them to have 3 toes, but if you wanted to have more, you would just need to add more wires to them. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a ball of clay, pretty large ball of clay, and we're going to start covering up the base of our wireframe. Just where everything is combined and wrapped together, we're going to completely cover that in clay, just so that everything is held together nicely. Now I don't really want my dragon to have claws per se, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm not going to be adding claws to the tips of all the wires. I'm going to do a pre-bake right now with just the lump of clay holding everything together. So these are just going to go in the oven for probably about 15-20 minutes at our 275 Fahrenheit temperature. Once they're done baking and have cooled to touch, we can start adding more clay to the wire frame. So for the toes, I am going to be doing basically the top and bottom at the same time. Normally when I do feet, I just lay out the clay to the bottom and then we do scaling or something to the top. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to wrap them all the way around the wire, and I'm going to clean up the edge underneath the toe. So basically we're not going to do a top and a bottom, this is the whole toe. So I'm going to do this to all of my toes. I'm going to take my strips of clay, lay them out on the tops of the wires, and then kind of wrap them around to the bottom portion and blend that in so you don't see any of the wire. I'm also blending the clay for the toes into the clay that we already have on the wire frame. That way everything looks like one solid piece. Now I know I said I didn't want claws per se for the ends of the toes, but I do want to add a nail. So I'm going to take kind of a rounded piece of clay. I'm going to keep it rounded because I don't want anything sharp on this piece other than the horns. And I'm just going to lay those out on the fronts of the toes and then blend them into the rest of the foot, kind of shaping them like a fingernail. Lastly, we need to decorate the tops of the feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a wrinkling to where the knuckles would be, and then I'm going to take some other balls of clay and we're going to lay those out to make some scales. So I'm not going to lay these out on the toes, I'm just going to be doing the very tops of the feet. Now I want to add a texture to the scales, so I'm going to take one of my kind of sharper tools and I'm going to just add some line work going across them. Lastly, I'm going to clean up the edges of where the feet are going to connect to the body of the dragon, and then I'm going to put everything in the oven for roughly about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. So we're going to have to wait for all of our clay pieces to finish baking, and then we can start painting them. Now for the painting, I'm going to leave my horns off of the dragon's face for now, because I don't want to get paint on them, but after we're done with the painting and stuff, we'll end up gluing them into place. So I kind of want to stick with a very pale white palette for the face and the feet, but I do want to add some pinks and maybe a little bit of a very pale lavender to it. So I'm going to get everything primered. I'm going to start with white and then start adding a little bit of highlights with the pinks and stuff where I want it to be a bit more rosy. So for me, what I want to do with the rosy color is I want to add it to the more raised portions or the more details that I want you to pay attention to. So maybe the snout, we can add a bit of redness to that. The eyes, we can kind of brighten up as well. And then I kind of want to go around the main section where we have those beads. And because I want everything to be very pale, I'm going to slowly darken things up if I want to have shadows or anything, because I don't want to go immediately to black and then it just looks way too dark. So I'm just gradually adding colors here and there, that way I keep everything very pale. A good example of this is the crease of the mouth. I want it to be darkened because it's slightly opened and it needs to be shadowed, but I don't want to go full black, so I'm going to be going with a kind of lighter gray with it, and if I want to darken it, I can. So I'm just slowly adding color here and there where I feel like it needs to be. I'm not doing too much to the face, it's just very lightly adding colors to it. I think the darkest I went was under the eyes, and I decided to use more of a metallic pink for that, and I used a kind of darker pink for the tongue as well. So I laid all the colors out, and then since some of the areas were a little bit too dark for my liking, I went over them with white again to pale them out, and then I also used white to add some highlights here and there. So again, the painting for this was actually kind of minimal, but we got a lot of detail out of it. And then the painting for the feet is very basic as well. Everything got completely primered with white, and then the features that I mainly wanted painted were the claws or the nails, and then I ended up doing the scales on the tops of the feet as well. So the nails I ended up doing kind of a pale pink, and then the scales ended up being more of a lavender. Now I ended up getting my colors a little too dark on the feet. I liked how they looked, but the rest of the features were a little bit paler, so I decided to just get a little bit of white on my brush, and I went over everything to pale it out a bit more. So I just lightly went over the surface of the feet with a white paint just to kind of get everything to match the rest of the clay pieces. So once I was done with the painting, I let everything completely dry, and then I mixed up a little bit of resin and I painted it over the surface of all my clay pieces. That had to cure overnight, but once it was done curing, I ended up mixing up a little bit more resin and I added my horns to the face. And the reason I did this was I didn't want my horns to be shiny, I wanted them to be matte, and I also went over those with glitter earlier, that way they'd be a bit more sparkly. So I placed my horns on the top of the head. I used a combination of resin and glue, that way the glue could hold the horns into place while the resin cured. And then after that, I decided to decorate the top of the head a little bit more with some more gems and stuff. So what I did for this was I painted on a little bit of resin on the surface of the face where I wanted to add stuff to it, and then I used my tools and I kind of picked and poked and placed the different gems and stuff that I wanted on the face. Now, this actually took quite a while to do, and I probably needed tweezers for it, but I managed to do what I could with the tools that I had. So I got everything placed on the top of the head, and then I set the face somewhere to cure overnight. So that's going to have to cure again, and our feet are already done, so if we want we can work with those, but right now we're going to start sewing and putting together the body. While I was at it, I decided that I wanted to add some glitter to the nails, so I went over them lightly with my resin, and then I sprinkled glitter over them to stick into the resin. So our glittered nails and our horns and all the gems that we put on the face are going to have to cure again overnight. So while that's curing, we can start working on putting the body together and sewing everything. Okay, so this is the pattern that I'm going to use to make the body for our dragon. The body is actually going to be very long, and this time around I'm not going to have a wire frame because I just want something a little floppy and fun to hold on to. I don't want to have it posable. So I'm going to use my pattern and I'm going to get all my fabric pieces cut out. For the body, I wanted it to be white to go along with everything else, so we're going to be using a kind of long fur white fabric, but I'm going to end up shortening a lot of this later with a hair trimmer. Now normally when I work on putting my creatures together, I start from the front to the back, so we normally start with the head and work our way down, but this time around we're going to start with the tail and work our way up to the head. So I have the two pieces for the body, there's a top and a bottom, and then for the tail, I'm going to be doing something similar to what I did with our lava salamander. I'm going to be making kind of a frilly tail effect. So I ended up making this frill earlier, just used a little bit of fabric and I scrunched it together, and we're going to be sewing our tail closed on both sides, but while we're sewing it, we're going to be sewing this in place along the sides. So this frill is going to wrap around both sides of the tail. So I'm going to sew our ruffle into place and close up our tail, and I'm also going to stuff it slightly as well. Now honestly, I could have added this last because it really wasn't necessary to add it now, but I was excited and I wanted to see how it looked. So I have this little bit of trim that has these beads on it, and I'm going to be sewing it around the base of the tail, and it's going to also continue along the length of the body completely. So I have it measured to the full length of the body twice, and I've got the very middle at the very end of the tail. So I'm going to start at the tip of the tail and I'm going to start sewing this in place along the side of the tail. I'm going to do this to both sides, and you'll have a little extra. This is going to be for the body. So I'm just going to leave this connected and we'll sew it into place when we get further along. So the tail is pretty much all done. Now we need to start on the legs. So the legs, they have an inside piece and an outside piece, very similar to the body. There's just a left and a right if you want to think of it that way. And we're going to take each side and we're going to sew down the fronts of all the legs. We're only going to be doing the fronts. Now because we're not doing a wire frame, we can actually add our clay pieces to the legs before we put everything together. So I'm going to take our clay feet and I'm going to glue them at the end of the legs. We're going to wrap that fabric right around the base of the clay feet, let that dry a little bit, and then we can stuff and close up all of our legs. Honestly, doing the legs like this is a lot easier, but again, you can't really do a wireframe for the body if you're going to have the legs put together separate. It's just a little too hard to make the wireframe. So I'm going to get all the legs stuffed and closed up. The very base of them where we're going to connect them to the body is still open, so just be careful of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to shave them. So I want the fur fabric to be a little bit shorter, so I'm going to go over all of the fur that's on the legs and just trim it up and get it shaped where I want it. After we're done shaving our legs, we can then start adding them to the body. So I'm going to start with the back legs first, and we're going to sew those into place on both sides of the body. So we're going to get those connected, and then we can start sewing the sides of the body closed as well. And while we're doing this, we can stuff the body. So we're going to sew all the way down the sides of the body until we get to the point where we want the front legs to be. Once we have that sewn, we can then take that trimming that we stopped at the base of the tail, and we can continue it going down the sides of the body. So I'm just going to be sewing this in place as well. Now we can take our front legs and we can sew them into place just like we did with the back legs. Now after I get the front legs in place, I'm also going to be sewing down the sides of the neck and just kind of closing everything up. We're also going to be sewing the trim along the sides of the neck as well. Now because I want to get the sides of the neck sewn into place, it's going to be a little tricky to stuff the neck and glue the head into place at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom piece of fabric and I'm going to cut that in half. That way we have an opening. So once we have the head glued into place, we have an opening to stuff it afterwards. That way we don't have to do two things at once. So once the neck is done, now we just need to add the head and whatever embellishments we want to add to that. So I want to have that same trimming that we have along the sides of the body, along that frill. So I'm going to be gluing that around that portion of the head. And then I'm also going to take the frilly kind of lacy fabric that we used for the tail, and I'm going to go around the head as well. So I'm going to get that in place first. I'm going to let that dry, and then we can glue our head into place on the body. So I'm going to glue the head into place, wrapping the fabric for the neck all the way around the base of it. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then I can stuff the rest of the body and close it up.
Okay guys, and that's how I made an axolotl dragon. I had so much fun with this project, and I was just so excited when I saw that comment. I kind of dropped everything and started on this project, and I'm really glad I did. Hopefully I can make more kind of similar dragons in the future, because I actually really like the body style of this piece. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so if you guys want to buy anything, check the links down below. Also, all the materials and stuff, I've got links for that as well, so if you want to make something yourself, that's down there too. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!